So, darling people, here we are again. Another little hour to look at, think about, analyze, contemplate the meaning of life, the meaning of the mind, what a human being is and what our potential is. Because really, one way of saying it is that, So we'll listen, think about, contemplate, take some tools from it. Maybe 1% is okay. You can be a 1% Buddhist, no problem. So, okay, something I've been thinking about this morning. This week I've got these classes with this lovely group of people in Nepal, Kathmandu, who are training to be teachers. And so they're learning all the Buddhist approach as well, and combining it with Steiner's approach, all those people. It was very nice to meet them. And so this morning we were discussing, there was a 6:30 in the, by the way, my time, 6:30 in the morning, my time, because Nepal's like 12 hours between, it's either night or morning, So we were discussing the whole business of attachment and aversion and trying to see the interplay between these two, which is when the practice of patience comes in. There's a really interesting point. This is kind of very powerful, actually. So when we say patience, I think we usually mean passive aggression. Honestly, just grit your teeth and hope that horrible thing will go away. And that causes just even more stress, you understand? So what's the alternative? And this is what real practice is, and it really takes time. But this is when basically the practice of patience kicks in, the millisecond, this emotional hunger that's just there all the time, driving us underneath everything, underneath all our good stuff, underneath our life. And that's what attachment means, this deeply ingrained, instinctive craving to get everything to be nice. So the best way to put what attachment is this junkie in us that wants everything to be lovely. And more specific and more brutal, attachment is wanting everything to be the way that I want it. It goes without saying, doesn't it? I mean, if you want everything to be lovely for everybody else, well, then you're a saint by now. So it's obvious that wanting what I want is wanting the nice things. So naturally, and that's just called attachment. And it's joy of the universe. Monkeys and dogs and ants are all driven by it. And it's very primordial. So the real moment of practice is the second that attachment doesn't get what it wants. And honestly, I say it, but it's really true if you analyze, that's 1,000 times a day. Honestly. So then, of course, it gives rise to anger, but we don't think, well, I don't get angry very much in the day, and you might not, but you get frustrated, annoyed, irritated, upset, anxious, worried. They're all mild versions of anger. That's literally what they are. That's not the world's view, for sure. We would never think that you've got a mental problem if you get annoyed or frustrated or upset or irritated. We would just say you're normal. And this is the radical difference with the Buddha's view, that he goes to much subtler levels, showing us the possibility, at subtler levels. His view of what we can become is outrageous, actually. It's really quite shocking, which is encouraging. So when do you start practicing this patience, and what is it? What does it literally mean? Well, it's actually a very brave attitude. It's like, this is really also what they call in the Bodhisattva path, a really dramatic level of this practice in the Bodhisattva path, especially where you're really working deeply on your mind, where you've got much more sophisticated levels of ability to work on your mind. They call it, it's not just, the very first level of practice is kind of like, they say you just turn yourself to wood. You don't respond. You just let it be there. There's no comment. You just try to, at least you don't get angry. At least you don't shout. At least you don't have a panic attack, But this more dramatic level, this more dramatic approach is actually called transforming problems into happiness. Or as Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, learning to like problems like we like ice cream. I mean, it's a great way of putting it. And of course, initially it sounds ridiculous. Who the hell wants to like a problem? It's just a contradiction in terms, isn't it? But this is where, the more we understand this practice, and we start at the very beginning where you control your body and speech, you control the servants of your mind. At least you don't shout at somebody. At least you don't curse when you stub your toe. And you just turn to wood. Then you start to really work on your mind in the next level of practice, become your own therapist, and you really begin to see moment by moment as much as you can, and you start to navigate these moments of attachment, getting what you want, getting irritated when you don't get it, mild levels of anger. They're mild levels of anger. We must take them seriously. You practice, you start at that level. At least, you learn to kind of greet the problem. Okay, I stubbed my toe. It's okay. I dropped the cup. It's okay. The light's red. It's okay. These are the baby examples, and you've got to start there. You're training yourself to greet the problem. And now more dramatically in the bodhisattva path, more and more that you now are understanding interdependence, more and more you're practicing bodhicitta, and more now you're really driven, and this is where it is more advanced, we can listen to it. The main thing that drives your wish to greet problems with a really happy mind, to interpret them differently, is because you've got this such compassion for other sentient beings, and what literally is holding you back from benefiting others is your delusions. I mean, that's a pretty advanced view. The first stages of practice, the wisdom, when you're doing it for your benefit, and this is really important, you are the beneficiary of giving up attachment, practicing patience, giving up anger. You've got to remember that you are the beneficiary. Do never doubt that for 1 second. It's for your own sake that you want to become like this. Then at the advanced levels in the Mahayana path, the reason you want to smash your delusions is because they are preventing you from being a bodhisattva. I mean, that's advanced. I mean, that's outrageous, you know. I can't help others enough. I'm too caught up in myself. I'm not able to really help others. So this radical one, which is really rooted in emptiness, which is really rooted in dependent arising, which is the Buddha's essential view that things don't have an intrinsic nature. This is really the essential view. The real wisdom teachings in Buddhism come to this. And you start with the first level. You start when you see the chocolate cake and attachment makes it look more delicious to you and you get all excited. You start not believing that. Things don't exist the way they appear to the delusions, is what Buddha's telling us. But here we really practice at a more dramatic level. Things don't have an intrinsic nature. So that thing that we call bad, which is simply what my attachment doesn't want, it could be something that somebody else really likes. So that proves immediately right there, it doesn't have an intrinsic nature. I mean, if Lou can really love carrot cake and hate chocolate cake, and I can love chocolate cake and hate carrot cake, it proves immediately that, as our mothers would teach us, beauty, but ugliness as well, is in the eye of the beholder. My mother's told us that. This is emptiness, people. So putting this seriously into practice for one's own sake is incredible practice. This is exactly what I talk about. I told the people in Nepal this morning about my friends in prison. This is exactly what they're doing. This is precisely what they're doing. They're living in these garbage dumps. Nobody would choose to live in a prison. You don't look up the real estate pages and go, oh, I might live there. It's free. No way. You don't want to, unless it's a nice prison in Norway. I think the further north you get in Europe, the nicer the prisons. I remember a friend of mine, Norway or somewhere, he wrote and said he was so excited. He was looking forward to his 2 years in prison. And it was in this lovely country estate in the middle of Norway, somewhere where you got education and training and had vegetable gardens. I mean, of course he'd look forward to it. Who wouldn't? Free was his prison sentence. God almighty. So, but Mitchell in Kentucky definitely does not live in a nice place in the country in Norway. He lives in this garbage dump, boiling hot in the sun. I've been there many times. It's actually a prime piece of real estate, this particular prison. It's overlooking this very beautiful lake. But of course, you can't see the lake because of this great big fat Victorian bluestone building with no AC, boiling in the summer, freezing in the winter. The food, I've eaten there a few times, pretty disgusting with respect to the kind cooks. You would not want to choose to, believe me, you wear your red jumpsuit if you're on death row, you wear your brown jumpsuit if you're in the regular general place, you wear your green jumpsuit if you're in protective custody, all got the different color coding. You have all barbed wire everywhere and big fences everywhere. And the death row guys live in this place on their own, in their house all the time. They've got their own, about 40 of them on death row, in their red jumpsuits in this garbage dump with noise like you can't imagine, like being in a rock concert all day, as one of my friends said. So you wouldn't choose to live there. So that would be what we would consider a problem. Pretty simple. A problem. It's called what you don't want. It's called what attachment doesn't want. It arises aversion. You look at it, your senses are assaulted. You listen, your senses are assaulted. I mean, this is the point about if you can change, Buddha says, or Shantideva or somebody says, if you can change something, please change it. But the key point is, what if you can't? This is the point at which you practice this so-called patience. But don't think of it as like this passive aggression. What patience is this brave, intelligent attitude that does not resist it. Aversion is resistance. Attachment runs towards something. Oh, that's lovely. Aversion goes, oh my God, no, go away, isn't it? That's the primordial energy of the attachment and aversion. Greedily going towards something, eating it up, or pushing it away. And it's totally instinctive, which means we've practiced attachment and aversion for eons. So the practice is to don't resist the problem. Don't resist the toe hurting. Don't resist the red light. Don't resist the broken cup. Don't resist it. Greet it. Oh, okay, I broke a cup. That's okay. Break another one. Oh, I stubbed my toe. And you check the pain, and then you check, you practice emptiness. Well, where is the pain? I wonder where it's intrinsically painful. This is the practice. Anyone with a half a brain can do this. You just have to want to. But you've got to see the benefits. Don't think of it as just being a good girl. You're going to be a good girl and get rewarded because you're being patient. No, it's an incredible practice. And when you're really practicing it, you're seeing this problem as good only because it helps you smash ego, which is what you're desperately trying to do because you want to benefit others. This is the most advanced level. So it's common sense. It's good psychology. It's really common sense. We just have to hear it properly. But forget even benefiting others. You've got to see how you are the beneficiary when you greet a problem. That's the difference between, I always use the same example, but difference between my friend Sunny on death row for 17 years, accused of murdering 2 policemen, whose husband got executed, whose head burst into flames at the execution that she attended, who lost her children, her parents died, accused of murdering 2 policemen, 17 years living in hell, most of it in a single cell. She had this intelligence, unbelievable emotional intelligence, not a Buddhist, to see that going crazy, full of rage, despair, anger, would only make her insane. She saw this. She understood. This is just so astonishing. I can't get over it. It's so rare to find a human being who can do that naturally, She knew she could change her mind. She knew she would be the beneficiary of not going crazy. But we assume, this is the part that's fascinating. You stub your toe, and I shout, and someone says, Robina, you could maybe not shout. What do you mean? Of course I'm angry. I just stubbed my toe. In other words, we assume because you stub your toe, we assume because you've got a headache, we assume because your knee hurts, not to mention all the other problems of life, that of course you'll get angry. We say that. So it's in a sense a revelation to realize we have a body and a mind, and they're not the same. They're connected, and we can change our mind. We can greet a problem. We can see it differently. The reality is we do this every day, but we just don't think about it like that. So I was thinking when I studied Kung Fu, I was a fanatic. I trained 6 days a week. And if the teacher had taught 7 days, I would have gone 7 days. I'm based in London. It was 35 years ago when I was younger. I'd collapse and die now if I did what I did then. So I loved my Kung Fu, So I would not even eat lunch because I wanted to have an empty stomach when I trained. I'd go to class at 6 and I'd come home at 10. Utterly, that's the point, absolutely exhausted. I'd lie in my bath full of arnica and heal my aching muscles. But listen to this, my mind was very happy. Now, if I had that kind of pain just by sitting watching television, we'd call that a problem. I'd be upset and angry. I'd take all these pills, But I had this pain every night, 6 days a week, and I had a happy mind. So it's proof. It is proof that you can decide to greet something. So I loved doing Kung Fu. I trained fanatically, 3 hours every day, 30 push-ups on my knuckles, exhausted, sweating, collapsing. I died a decent sleep every night. So that's called physical pain. Now, no one called me a masochist. It's like going to get somewhere where you get beaten up. No one called me a masochist. We all understand this. This is proof immediately that because your body hurts doesn't mean you should get angry. But because you stub your toe, you think, of course I'll get angry. I've got a pain in my knee. Of course I'm angry. No, not of course anything. You can change your mind. This is a revelation, actually. It's a revelation to realize this because we just think we're stuck in it. Got no choice, Of course I'm angry. The light's red. When we start to analyze this, everything changes in our life. It's really true. It just means we start to be in charge of our mind, not be just pulled from pillar to post by the external world. So, we loved it. One person recently who's been listening to some teachings, and she said, I really need some more teachings. You keep saying the same thing, she said. That's true, I do. But she got bored. She got bored. She wanted something more interesting, she said. So she started listening to Mahamudra and Dzogchen and everything. I said, well, fantastic. I said, you go for it. But the interesting thing is, you know, you go to the Mahamudra teachings, you start to analyze Mahamudra. Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. It's amazing. But it's like going straight to university. You know, I'm bored by junior school and high school. But you can't understand university if you haven't been to junior school and high school. And this is what I find interesting. This is what I find very fascinating. These teachings are the same. Now, sometimes I feel like a fraud. You're going to catch me out one day. And she did. She caught me out. She said, you always say the same thing. She's right. She didn't mean to be insulting. She's right. I did. I do, you know. But this is what I find interesting. When you go to the teachings of like Dalai Lama, His Holiness, they're very hierarchical. So in the front row are the 80-year-old abbots, okay, who've been listening to this stuff for 75 years. And then you've got the 5-year-olds at the back who are hearing it for the first time. But when His Holiness teaches the Lam Rim, which is this traditional packaging, which is essentially what I'm teaching in my own words, it's the basic stuff. But this is the point. The abbots listen to it, even though they've been hearing it for 75 years, but this is the point. They hear it at their level. They hear it at their level. So a person, so even my ordinary words, you know, I'm not some holy person, but my ordinary words, I can even see myself saying these words since Lama Zopa told me to teach back in 1987, for example. And then before that, listening for 10 years to this stuff, you know, listening, trying my best to think about it, practice it. I'm saying the things that I might have said back in 87. But I can tell you that every time I say these words, I hear them in a different way. So it's the same teaching, but you hear it according to your level. So there's a way of presenting emptiness, for example. In a sense, what we're implying here is emptiness. Saying that nothing has an intrinsic nature is saying that everything's empty. So saying those simple words, when you hear it for the first time, you don't understand it. But if you say it or hear it for the 90 millionth time, then you hear it according to your capacity. So then that's where, if we just hear the teachings, it's sort of like you say, oh, I've heard that music before, play me something different. But a person who appreciates music will hear this marvelous piece of music by Bach and they'll listen to it 50 millionth time. Every time you hear it, you'll get a deeper understanding. That's, I think, is the point. I can see this. I mean, otherwise I'd be bored to tears saying these same words. I'd be embarrassed to say these same words. I would be bored to tears saying these same words all the time. But I'm not. Every time I say it, it's fresh. I think that's the point, isn't it? It's very interesting. Then I forgot why I said all that. Never mind. So, okay, nothing has an intrinsic nature. So that problem called a painful body was not a problem. It was something I welcomed. I welcomed it. I welcomed it. I welcomed it. So that's the real practice. That's the most radical way to give up attachment and anger. I swear to you, the two primordial drives, craving for the nice thing and then having a panic attack when we don't get it. This is essentially, I mean, it sounds so simple. It sounds cute. It's profoundly true, you know. Which doesn't mean you give up and become passive. This is the point. We hear that as being passive. So this is why my friend Sunny is a good example. She practiced this to perfection, but that didn't mean she sat back and did nothing. She never stopped working on her freedom for those 17 years, and she got it eventually. She never stopped working on it. So when you say give up anger, we think you become passive. That's the biggest mistake we make. It's the opposite. That's why I quote His Holiness one time in an interview. The interviewer talked about radical, political action. And the interviewer said, you can see that comes from anger and it seems very healthy. You get out there and act to change things. And His Holiness said, I know what you mean. But he said, when it's really only anger, you just give up eventually. You just get fed up, you get bored because it's not sustainable. Whereas if it's coming from compassion, this is where it's more advanced, then you'll never give up. So this is why I always quote Martin Luther King. I love this. He said, he was one of these activists, an activist. It was clear he had a patient nature, He didn't shout and yell and wasn't radical like Malcolm X, whom I loved at the time. I remember Martin Luther King said, it's good to be angry. What he meant was, it's good to find fault. It's good to see there's something wrong out there. Look at the injustice, look at the racism, look at the sexism, look at the poverty. That's called criticism. That's not necessarily anger. Anger is, oh my God, look at that poverty. How dare someone do that to that person? Shout, yell, scream. That's anger. So seeing something is wrong is not anger. It's a fact. There is injustice. There is poverty. That's not anger. It's a fact. It's negative to say it, but it's true. That's not anger. But we confuse it with anger. So we think if you give up anger, you give up seeing the problems. Oh, everything's really lovely. No, rubbish. Not true. So, but then, as Martin Luther King said, it's good to find fault, but then you say, what can I do to help? That's compassion. That's outrageous, you know. So then seeing the problem, you just stubbed your toe. It is called stubbing your toe. It did cause a pain in your knee, in your toe, but then you grab your mind, and this is because you're trying to give up attachment. It's an opportunity to give up that instinctive craving for lovely things, which is attachment, which causes pain. So you greet the problem. So when you can greet a problem like pain in the knee, then you can greet a problem being accused of murdering 2 policemen and be on death row for 17 years. Don't wait till then, because you won't be ready, I promise. That's why we've got to start soon with the baby events. And that's our problem, I think, in the West, when we talk about psychological problems and therapists and everything. We don't notice the ordinary levels of unhappiness. We wait till the wheels fall off before we do something about it. And that's just plain stupid. Because you've got attachment and aversion and delusions all the time. They're all there. So you've got to grab them and take them as an opportunity to practice, you know. So, yeah. So I think, are there any questions, please? I'd like some questions, but you have to give me 1 second first. Give me.
Please raise your hand if you have a question. The raise hand icon. Lou just put the directions in the chat box. Thanks, Barb.
Okay, so go on then. Talk to me. Say it again now, Barbara. Talk to me, darling.
Hi, Venerable Robina.
Hello,
Thank
darling.
you.
Happy to see you. Yes.
You have talked on this before, but I am just really stuck with this. And I'm going to just use the person that I've kind of been working on, and it's, as you call him, Mr. Trump. And I'm to the point where I see him as a suffering man, and I sincerely do want him to be happy. But then following those 2 thoughts are, he does not deserve it.
That's right. There you go, Barbara. Perfect.
I don't know what that's about.
There you go. Good. Let's discuss this, baby child. Perfect. Because let's analyze the philosophy that we're describing. In other words, the assumption in our typical mind is that a person who says and does things that, and this is, we're not discussing whether he's an evil person or not here. Don't worry about that. But basically, you are seeing and hearing a person who doesn't agree with your views. Would you agree with that? So that means but that could still be objective truth. But the painful part of you that's having a problem here is the attachment. Your attachment can't cope with this person. Your attachment is having a panic attack. So because of attachment, the only person you want to be happy is the person who fulfills your attachment's needs. So then not deserving is this totally self-centered, arrogant view. Join the universe, Barbara. That's rooted in attachment. That is, if there's a person out there who doesn't fit my attachment's needs, who doesn't say and do what I think is right, then he doesn't deserve to be happy. It shows the utter self-centeredness of that view, which is the normal world. Because if you were Mr. Trump's mother, if you were a fan of Mr. Trump, who only see, and they see the good things in Mr. Trump, they would want him to be happy, but only because he deserves it, because he does what they want. So this is the point. So there's one thing is the objective reality, is he a monster or is he not? That's not the issue here. So when you see a pedophile, we obviously would say he doesn't deserve happiness. So then we have to ask, this is when we do the equanimity practice, which is what you're describing here, what you're approaching. The equanimity practice is to get ourselves out of the equation and observe the friend, the enemy, and the stranger, and observe that from their point of view, as human beings, whether they're good or bad is not the discussion, but they're driven by the wish to be happy every second, and they're driven by the wish to not suffer every second. And every one of them has the potential to become Buddha. So it's from that perspective, we then develop this courageous attitude of love and compassion for all of them, so we can help them find the right method to get happy and stop suffering, which is for them to give up their delusions and their harming. But it's done out of compassion, like a wise mother for her crazy kid. Do you understand? Do you understand?
I do. Yes. Thank you, Venerable.
That's the point. Of course, that's exactly the point. This is why this is the compassion wing, and this is why it's tough. You know, it's really hard. And that is what's fascinating. The first instinct we have is he doesn't deserve it. What do you mean he wants to be happy? He doesn't deserve it. Because we all only want those to be happy who we love and who do what our attachment wants. That's the point. That's why it's so outrageous. We analyze it. It's unpack it. It's very fascinating. Clear?
Clear. Thank you.
Good, good, darling. Who else? Yes, hello there, dearest Judith.
The being able to, I get everything you're saying,
Good.
but I get challenged by, let's call it the real world. In other words, and let's not talk about Mr. Trump. Let's use another, a Stalin or a Hitler. I mean, I honestly think that both of them were crazed inside, and
Exactly.
should be horrible days, but they
Exactly.
were very destructive individuals.
That's right, exactly.
So how do you deal with that? How do
Okay,
you?
I understand, darling. I understand, sweetheart. So taking the Buddhist perspective, Judith, the big picture is, Buddha says, there are countless beings whose minds go back and back and back in past lives, whose minds continue into future lives, and who each moment are, number one, creating the cause for their future experiences, and number two, each moment are experiencing the fruits of their past actions. So if we analyze a naughty person, a Hitler, or just a naughty child, whatever, they came born with those tendencies from having practiced them before. Now, the group of people, let's use the Chinese communists and the Tibetans as two groups of people, two groups of human beings. The Chinese communists come along in 1950 and barge into Tibet and then take it over and kill millions of Tibetans, or a couple of million since the 1950s, whatever it is. Then that's a fact. That's the real world. So you've got to have an understanding. This is the point why in Buddhism, the big picture point of view, the basis of compassion is karma. So that's why I'll use the example of those two young Tibetan nuns, 2003, when Richard Gere invited His Holiness the Dalai Lama to New York, and he invited 20 former prisoners, all of whom Americans, all talked about their suffering. They'd done meditation in prison. People like me were invited who worked with people in prison. And he invited also two young Tibetan nuns, and they were talking about their experiences of being tortured and raped in prison by the Chinese communists. So it was very clear to the Americans, this is the point I'm getting to now, they were very clear to the Americans that if you wanted to quantify suffering, these young women's suffering was much worse than everybody else's. But what was evident to the Americans was these young women weren't angry. So they didn't have the view, how dare this happen to me? I don't deserve it, which is why we go mad when terrible things happen to us, or why we go crazy when we see terrible things happen to other people. Because from the materialist point of view, we can see this very clearly, Judith. There is no view of past lives and future. If you're a Christian, you have another view. But a Buddhist view, and these young women, this view of karma is in the bones of their being. It's been in Tibet for 1,200 years, and it came from India. This view has been the view of the world current in India for 3,000 years. It's a new one to us. It's a brand new idea to us. So it's quite shocking. But these young women, it's just integrated into their being. They know they've come from the past. They know that whoever they meet and whatever happens to them, they created the cause for it. So all the happiness that they have, all the good things they have, that's due to their past virtue. All the suffering they have, that's due to their past harming. They take this as a given. So that's the basis, therefore, of their work, their struggle. Talk about transforming problems, Judith. They were able to do that because of this view. And so then at the end of the talk, one of them, she had tears, and she said, and of course, we had compassion for our torturers because we know we must have harmed them in the past, and because we know they will suffer in the future. So that's what comes from the view of karma. Now, that is a big one for us. And I don't know how much you think about it, but that's the point behind it. That's the philosophical view behind our ability to know why Hitler, why Mother Teresa, for that matter. It's the same explanation for why good things happen, Judith. So when that's the basis, if we practice with that view, no one says we have to, then we know why there are Hitlers. We know why there are Mr. Trumps. We know why there are psychopaths. We know why there are good people and good things happening. That's the basis. And then within that, we have compassion for everybody. And then we have compassion to try to help people if we can, like a tough parent. You don't just let, the poor Mr. Hitler can't help it. He came into this life like this. No, put him in prison. That's fine, out of compassion, so he doesn't harm other people. This is the background. This is the basis of knowing from the Buddhist perspective, understanding Hitler's but also understanding good things, Judith. Why any good thing happens is also the same reason, because we created the cause ourselves. That's the big picture, darling.
Well, I can see that. You have to listen. What I was asking was, and I could be compassionate about Hitler, but does that mean I don't try to stop him?
No, that's what I said. Our view of compassion, this is the point I'm making, Judith. Our view of compassion now is, if I have compassion for somebody, we say, oh, the poor thing, they can't help it. That's not true. It's rubbish. Compassion is powerful and courageous and rooted in wisdom. So if you've got some maniac grandchild, if you've got attachment for that grandchild, Judith, you'll pat him on the head. Oh, look at him, isn't he sweet? But if you've got wisdom, Judith, you will stop that grandchild in his tracks. You might even put him in prison so he stops harming other people. That's what real compassion is. So when you know why a person does something, you understand karma. You see how they're causing themselves terrible suffering and how they're harming others. So you'll do everything in your power to stop them. Of course you will, but it's for their sake as well. It's tough. This powerful compassion has iron in it. It's not just weak and sentimental. That's the point. You understand that, what I'm saying?
Yes, thank you.
Good, Judith. Thank you, darling. What else, people? Hello then. Yes, Alona, talk to me, darling.
Hello, Venerable. Thank you for your teachings.
Okay.
I was just listening and the other ladies, and
Sorry, what?
I
Listening,
saw
what? Listening, what?
two women talking about anger and like understanding how dictators function and how to have compassion for them.
Oh, okay.
And I saw on Instagram, it was advertising. Lama Zopa was teaching Russian Buddhists how
That's
to
right.
deal with,
Yes.
yeah. And my response was, the first thought, they don't deserve him.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. They're harming your people. That's right, exactly.
They're bombing my country. He should not,
That's right.
and I felt, and I was like, catched my thought, and I was like, I know better, everything. And I thought they're the one who need them the most, probably. And they're fortunate that he has it. But I had that feeling, is still kind of in the chest, even mentally, logically, I let it go, that thought. But the energy of that is still kind of inside, because probably my delusion, whatever, it's sitting there. And Venerable, I had a dream, and I saw Lama Zopa, and he was this beautiful, brilliant, shiny, and he told me, you have to work on your pride, Alona.
Very good, girl. Well done. Well done. That's a nice dream. That's wonderful. Good on you, Alona. Because that's what's interesting. See, the part of the problem there too is you say I'm Ukrainian and they're Russian. You paint the whole of every Russian person with that brush. And clearly there are some Russians invading, your country, and there are some Ukrainians who probably agree with the Russians. So, it's the labeling we do. It's kind of instinctive, isn't it?
Yes. But I'm so glad
that's when I talk about, when I say the Tibetans, I always say the Chinese communists, who are the ones that, like the regime, not just Chinese people, the Chinese communists, who went and invaded Tibet and took it over. So it's kind of, but it's interesting, isn't it? Yes. Well done.
Yes,
girl.
it's very interesting how it's, and it's, as longer as that war goes on, I find I have to more and more work with that anger and frustration, and not because it just, yeah.
See, okay, thank you. So for second pointing me, let's look at then, how do we practice when we read about the news and think about it? This is the key point now. So the instinct of ego is to be angry or attached. That's the instinct of ego, like you just pointed out. This is for all, just general. It's a point you brought up. I think it's really good, Alona. So how do we what do we do with it? When we see the war, when we see what the Russians are doing, when we see what the Chinese communists are doing, when we see the poor people being suffered, when we see the animals being harmed, what is that? How do we make it all practice? And that's the point here. So we have to learn to use, there are different tools in our toolkit. You know, one tool is you understand karma. If that's a big thing for us, and I find karma's great, I love karma, then so one way of practicing is, I think of the Ukrainians and the Russians. You know, there's two groups of people with some tense karma from maybe 1,000 lifetimes ago. You know, the karma ripened, this thing happened, and there's this pain between these groups of people. The Russian boys, I mean, they don't know why they feel angry. They don't know. They didn't think to go and kill a Ukrainian a year ago. There they are. They go off to the army, and then this negativity comes up in them, and they get raged and angry, and they shoot. They're more surprised as anybody else. So this is the thing about how karma ripens. So first thing to learn about when you look at it is, let's analyze it from the point of view of karma. And then you go, thank you for showing me how not to be. And you use it as your personal practice. I'm going to never harm and never kill and never lie and never steal. So I will never have to experience that for myself. That's the real way to make it personal. You look at it, you analyze it. This is one example, karma. Thank you for showing me the nightmare of past harming and past anger. That's the way to practice. And then you vow to abide by the laws of karma. You use it as an example for yourself. Like if you look at a person who's kind of got, you know, cancer from smoking too many cigarettes, you go, my God, look at that. Thank you for showing me how not to be. I'm going to give up cigarettes. You take it as a practice, as a personal teaching. That's one practice, karma. The next one is you look at the mind. You see that clearly it's driven by anger, driven by violence, driven by aggression, driven by pride. You go, thank you for showing me that. I'm going to look at my mind. Then you have the compassion one. And you go, look at these poor people. Each of them didn't expect this 1 year ago. Now they're caught up in this nightmare from their past karma. And look at them suffering. How unbearable this suffering is. I'm going to have compassion, and I'm going to keep working on myself so I can benefit sentient beings. So you use these nightmarish experiences as grist for the mill for your own practice. Otherwise, we go mad. You with me, Alona?
Yes, absolutely.
It's going to become a real, sincere practice.
Yes, I found this teaching on the law of karma is like a freedom teaching of freedom.
That's how I feel too. That's true. Not paralysis, not the opposite. It's true, isn't it?
No, exactly. Yeah.
That's good, Alona. Thank you, darling. Very kind.
Thank you, Venerable.
We've got 20 minutes left. Let's talk about things. Any questions, any discussions? See, the thing that's interesting about these teachings, there's two types. There's the wisdom wing teachings, and there's the compassion wing teachings. They're completely different. You know, the wisdom wing is all about your mind, the nuts and bolts, unpacking and unraveling, see your delusions, let them go, abide by the laws of karma. It's very intricate, very precise inner work. It brings you are the beneficiary. It brings you to become more content, more wise, more fulfilled, more happy. That's the benefit of working on your mind. You are the beneficiary. Never forget that. But then also you've got the compassion wing. And that's where you proactively are trying to help others. So what holds us back from helping others is the delusions in our mind. So then, first of all, when the overt practice, the explicit teachings in the wisdom teachings is to control your body, speech, and mind, stop following delusions so you can become more content. You can become more fulfilled. You can become more happy. We forget that, but that's its purpose. That's methods for you to get happy. Then you can also see how every time you work on your mind and you're the direct beneficiary, it implicitly helps you have more compassion because you're breaking down the barriers between self and other. So then when you explicitly practice the compassion teachings, want to benefit others, see their suffering, really work to help others, that also chips away at ego. So each wing helps the other. They're utterly connected, but they're very specific practices, you know. In other words, you can have bodhicitta this outrageous paradigm shift in the mind of a human being, which is quite astonishing in ordinary Western psychological terms, almost like an impossibility, where you're like a saint, really. You're so astonishing in your unbelievable compassion for suffering sentient beings. You can even be that, but to a certain degree of bodhicitta, you can still lose it. But if you've realized emptiness, if you've cut the root of the misconception of a separate self, that you can never lose. And then when you realize emptiness and you're an Arya bodhisattva, meaning a bodhisattva who's realized emptiness, then you can never fall back, ever, 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 ever. You can only go forward. So if you've achieved the wisdom wing, you've achieved your own bliss, your own clarity, your own wisdom, your own joy, your own liberation. And you don't need to come back after you've achieved that. But if you've only got, but that's not enough, but it's fantastic. You need it, but it's not enough. You've got to have compassion. And if you've only got compassion and not wisdom, that's not enough either. So you've got to have both wings of the bird. It's a way of describing, it's a way of labeling, packaging all the practices. That's why I like this analogy so much. The wisdom wing, the compassion wing, they're utterly integrated, utterly connected. Every time you practice reaching out to another person, you chip away at your own ego. Every time you chip away at your own ego, you get closer to other people. They each help the other. So we have to be specific at different times and know which tools we use, One time with your child, you might use the wisdom one and be very firm and strict. You do this, you do that. Another time you just practice compassion where you just embrace them and love them for who they are. Different approaches all the time. And that's why the more we study the teachings in this package that it's described, the more you get to see the different purposes of the different stages, It becomes more and more integrated for us. And the other one, of course, is to Alona's point. This is the one about really learning to interpret the world in a different way. So you've got the Buddhist view, if you choose to have it, then instead of freaking out when we see suffering and panicking and pushing it all away, we can apply the law of karma. We know why it's happening. That's why those young Tibetan nuns were able to have compassion for their torturers, because that view is so profound for them, so integrated into their lives and enabled them to practice. So powerful. So then you see it according to what you need to practice most. I mean, you see the suffering out there in the world, understand karma, understand the mind, see the delusions, or have compassion view. Depends on which one you need at that time. So that's why I was just saying, use the example of Mr. Trump. Always use the example of Mr. Trump, just Mr. Trump, let's just say, just a person, I mean, I always joke, the Washington Post, all the time he was had the job, they kept the list of all his lies, and they gave them a certain number of Pinocchios. So the worst lies got 5 Pinocchios. Sometimes there's a 2 Pinocchio lie. Sometimes there's a 1 Pinocchio lie. They kept an entire list. It was hilarious, So the thing is with him, every time I'd see, whatever, instead of being angry with Mr. Trump, give the same old cliched response, I'd go, well, there's lying. I recognize that. There's attachment. There's anger, there's pride. For sure, there's attachment to reputation. You observe it. There's jealousy. There's arrogance. And then I'd go, 2 things, either 2 things. I'd say, thank you for showing me how not to be. And then I'd say, I recognize that. Because if Buddha's view of the mind, his model of the mind, doesn't even just refer to all humans, it refers to all animals and other beings as well. It's a universal view. The whole of Buddha's view about karma and the realms of existence is all rooted in this fundamental worldview he has about the mind. It's very fascinating. So that way, you then don't just get angry with Mr. Trump or Mr. Hitler or Mr. Stalin, whoever it might be. You use it as grist for your mill for you to practice. Then it's really powerful, And you learn from it. You learn from it. You take it as a teaching. Otherwise, just get angry and just resist it or get depressed. This is a problem, isn't it? Time is at 1:45. Other questions?
Venerable Robina, there's a question in the chat.
Good, Lou. Who is it?
It says, can you talk more about attachment to reputation?
Absolutely. Let's talk about that. Yeah. It's really, they don't really talk about, in the very first stages of practice, you learn about how to control your body and speech, the servants of your mind. Just don't jump on too many boys. Don't now he doesn't say even don't eat too many cakes, but we can imply that you control the servants of your mind, which is your body and speech. That's the first level. Discipline, live in vows, purify every day, discipline your body and speech. It's fantastic. Next level, you're now ready to look into the mind. This is the wisdom wing. And the level of attachment they teach there is at the very obvious level. And at the level at which you see that attachment is very disturbing, this emotional hunger, always wanting something more, never satisfied. And they describe it mainly about controlling now the attachment in relation to the boys and the cake and the new handbags and the money. It's of the obvious objects of the senses, which is the first level, the obvious, evident level of attachment. You calm your mind down, become more stable. So now when you get to more advanced, you go to the compassion wing, it's only really there when they talk about transforming problems, they talk about all this radical approach to smashing your delusions. They talk about this primordial level of attachment. So there's another whole way of describing, they refer to the 8 worldly dharmas. I don't know if you see that phrase. I know when I first heard it, I didn't know what they were talking about, you know. It's just the way they frame 8 different ways attachment manifests at a kind of more primordial level, you know. This runs the world. So this first pair, there are 4 pairs. The first pair is this attachment, is this assumption that what happiness is what you get when you want. So the millisecond you get what you want, then you hold on to it because now you're happy. That's the assumption of this first of the 2. So you try to giving that one up. And then when attachment doesn't get what it wants and you get the ugly thing, then the attachment shifts to trying to be free of the suffering. So first bit is you try to get the happiness based on the assumption that when attachment gets what it wants, and the millisecond suffering comes, then you shift, the attachment shifts to wanting to be free of the problem. So it's showing how attachment really is covering everything. Normally you'd say attachment when the nice thing happens and anger when it doesn't. But here we're saying attachment is across the board. Attachment to the nice things, the assumption I must only have the nice things and that's happiness. And then the assumption that when I get the ugly things, that's what misery is. So you try to shift the attachment to getting the nice things, and then you try to give up the attachment to not having the bad things. It's primordial. The next lot is this constant craving to get nice things, to be given things, to get things. And then as soon as you don't get things, the attachment then wants to be free of not getting things. It's a way of talking. But these last 2 pairs are the ones that we're really discussing here. And they seem similar, but you check, they're different. One is, they say, attachment to praise. The other one is attachment to reputation. Let's look how they're different. They're quite precise, different voices in the mind. So attachment to praise means basically it's attachment to hearing nice words with your name in them. Check that one. That's very specific. A person in front of you talking about you, or you read words about you, or so when you hear the nice words, attachment absolutely gets what it wants. You're craving to hear praise, nice words with your name in them. And look what happens. We hear one word of criticism. It's like a stab in the heart, isn't it? And all we want to do is be free of that criticism. Praise and blame, they call it. Now, this last lot, which I think is the most primordial, the last to go of ego, of attachment before you realize emptiness, is this constant assumption, I'm saying more words to it now, that somehow me as I am is not enough. So since we're born, we've had this constant deep craving since we're born from past lives to get a person smile at me, which tells me, wow, I must be a nice person. So in other words, this attachment is so primordial, it's a symptom of a broken person. There's an assumption, it comes from the assumption that unless somebody else approves of me, I don't exist. I'm nothing. So you look at the way our world is, look at samsara, how we all go into pairs, groups, monkeys find partners, humans find partners, the whole thing of finding a partner, the whole thing of so-called marriage, we used to call it just one thing, marriage one day, now it's multiple. This assumption that unless I find another half, we even call it that, I somehow don't exist. Of course, it's changing radically in the world. These conventions aren't the same anymore. But there's a deep assumption in that tradition that you are nothing on your own. You become and I think even in our cultural psychology and sociology, that the assumption is that you become social, how you become a proper person is by socializing with others. You need to be socialized. You're nothing on your own. You just like you don't even exist if you're on your own. But it's a weird state in our culture. So you become a real person only in relation to others. That's insanity. That's why you hear, if we compare with the materialist view psychology, and you think of a person who goes off for 1 year to do retreat, it's just weird. We don't know what they're doing. What the hell are you doing on your own for 1 year? You're mentally ill, you know. It doesn't make any sense to us, because the view we have of this attachment to being seen as a good person, to be liked by others, is the simplest way to put it. That for us is the main verification of our existence as a real human being. That's the proof of success. You must, if you can succeed in a relationship, you must be a valid person. I mean, this is how deep it is. So this is a craving simply to be liked, for someone to smile at you. And this attachment to being seen as a nice person, this attachment to be validated, this attachment to be approved of, is the most primordial attachment of all. It's very interesting. So that's what drives most of us. So then many people are very nice and don't say naughty words. The negative side of that is they're terrified of people not liking them, so they'll behave nicely. There is compassion and kindness there, but kind people, nice people, who are mummy's little helpers. The attachment to be seen as a good girl is so tremendous. And you're blind to it. You can't see it. And then you're so kind, you are compassionate, but you wonder why people then abuse you and treat you like a doormat, because you've got this craving to be seen as a nice girl. You need to be verified, validated as a nice girl, which is your view of yourself. This is how deep this attachment is. It prevents us from really being authentic. It prevents us from being brave, from sticking our hand up, from saying the right thing, doing the right thing, because we're scared of what people think. This is terrifying. That's why I always quote that story about this nurse who wrote a book about the 5 greatest regrets of the dying. And the greatest regret among the dying people she worked with was that they didn't follow their heart. They didn't do what they really knew they wanted to do. Instead, they did what they thought was expected of them. This is a really serious problem in all cultures, some more than others. And we call it not making trouble. We call it, oh, I don't want to upset people. So it's really tricky to see the difference between being kind and compassionate and this attachment to reputation, because it pollutes the kindness and the compassion, you know. It's very subtle, very primordial. And since we're born, it's been there, you know, programmed in our minds. So it takes, and so it's the hardest one to see, because it's every second. You think about it, we're always thinking, when we're thinking, I is always the central player in our head, isn't it? I. And it's always in reference to what others are thinking, and she thought this, and she did this, and she said that, and he this, and maybe this. And we're always talking to people in our head. We're always, and that's why people are lonely, I think. Loneliness is you've got no one to talk to. You've got no one to share your thoughts with. Now, that's a wonderful human thing to do. There's nothing wrong with it. It's marvelous to have friends. It's marvelous to share our experiences. But if we see it from the point of view of this emotional hunger of attachment, lonely means I'm not a valid person because no one is there to verify my thoughts. No one is there to validate my feelings. Think about it. We've got to ask, why do you need someone else to hear your thoughts in order for your thoughts to be valid? But that's what this attachment to reputation thinks. My thoughts are nothing if I can't share them with others. So we mix this with all the virtues as well. So we've got to be so clear in our analysis, you know. I mean, equally, a person who sits on their own all day and all night doesn't mean they've given up attachment to reputation. They're just being self-centered, maybe, and thinking of themselves all day. So it's very tricky to distinguish between the virtuous states of mind and these unhappy neurotic ones. And you see what we mean by in general, in the world's terms, what we mean by success is by definition, people's approval. Think of it. That's what we mean by success. Someone else approving of you. It's very fascinating. It's utterly fascinating. We should think about it. So how you give it up is by, having the courage to first check, what do I really want? What am I thinking? What is what I'm thinking, not just what I'm thinking I'll get the right feedback from. It's quite powerful to really see our own mind. And this is often what prevents us from having the courage to do something. Like Mary rings me up and says, Robina, there's an amazing teaching coming in France next weekend. Would you like to come with me? The first thing I'll say is, oh, not possible. No, I couldn't do that. My husband won't approve. The kids won't approve. I've got a job to do. I couldn't leave work. Haven't got the money. No, not possible. Not possible. No, the first thing to say is, what a good idea, Mary. Let's look into it. And you might even find the way to do it with courage. Instead of, no, not possible. Couldn't do that. No. That's how we mostly hold ourselves back. And we're really, because we're afraid of upsetting the husband, upsetting the children, upsetting the boss. Or the world vaguely, oh no, I won't be approved of. Oh no, you can't do that. Because you vaguely, this feeling of being approved of. You've internalized mummy, daddy, God, the police, the world in general, this vague notion of they out there. We're driven by this. And it's just programmed since we're born, We've got to really unpack this one. Slowly. I hope that helps. Now it's time to go. So work with that one. Have the courage to become our own person. I love that phrase. It's so nice in the West. Become our own person. Then you'll be more contented, more filled, more brave, more courageous. And then you'll be also, people will like you. You'll be happy with people, but you won't be craving for their liking. When you're an independent person who knows what they want and does what they want and is content in yourself, everyone adores you. It's the best way to get friends, is stop craving to have friends. Because you're courageous now, Goodbye, people. Thank you, Petals. Everyone.